Hello, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am super happy that you're here. To ring in the last couple of weeks of this year, I'm going to give you encore presentations of some of my favorite interviews of the last few years. Some go far enough back that you might hear me call the podcast by its old name, The Creative Mindset. Grammy Award-winning and Tony-nominated composer and lyricist and my good friend, Andrew Lippa, joins me on the show today to talk about Broadway and studying music and musical theater today. This interview holds a special place in my heart because Andrew and I went to high school together. In fact, he was my leading man for every musical and play we did together except one. When we did The Fantastics, my very first show ever, he was El Gallo and I was Bellamy. But after that, we were always paired together. It was an amazing and ridiculously fun experience, and I hope you enjoy this far-reaching conversation.
This is the notion of critical thinking and why we go to college, I think, which is, how do you know when you don't know? What is the system you use that tells you, I might not know this thing?
Hello, and welcome to the Creative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. In the show, my guests and I explore how we can use creativity to do our best work and live our best lives. I talk with authors, musicians, actors, scientists, and others who are all pushing the envelope to live fully, creatively, and authentically. Listen in to get the scoop on how you can do it too. Hello, and welcome to the Creative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am super thrilled that you are here. I'm also honored and thrilled and delighted with this week's guest. So check this out. You might know my guest as a Tony and Grammy-nominated composer and lyricist of shows like Big Fish, The Addams Family, and The Wild Party. You might also know him as the composer and sometimes the star of the epic oratorio, I Am Harvey Milk. You might have heard that he has been the musical director for many of Kristen Chenoweth's shows since the late 90s. And I know it's a well-known fact that he took second place for the Alice B. Ducey Award for all-around outstanding fifth grader, but he lost to Cynthia Fink. And I know him as my leading man in most of our shared high school theater shows. He was the Oberon to my Titania in Midsummer Night's Dream, the Brack Weaver to my Jenny Parsons in Down in the Valley, and the Ray Frackstraw to my Josephine and Gilbert and Sullivan's HMS Pinafore. And we've been trying to find a time to get together and talk on this show for ages, so I'm thrilled that we finally have a chance to rub 2 minutes together and chat. I'm thrilled to welcome Andrew Lippa to the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, Isolde, and hello to all your listeners.
This is so wonderful. I'm so glad and honored that you were able to find some time to chat about this. There's so many things to talk about. I hardly know where to begin, but let's go back to the beginning. Let's start probably super young. When did music become sort of the main focus for you? How did you decide that music and art was what you wanted to do? What sparked that interest to begin with?
I don't think it was a decision. I don't think it was an active decision. Deciding where to go to college and what I was going to study in college, that was the decision. But I think from the very first time I was ever exposed to music, I suppose that's, your mother singing or your mother and father singing. And that's probably where I learned it, from my parents singing to me, like probably almost every child. And music was always this, specifically music, not other art forms, but specifically music was always this natural, like, breathing thing for me. And I remember we had these I grew up in suburban Detroit, as you did, and we had wonderful public education and wonderful public school music and arts programs. And in fact, my elementary school teacher won the Michigan Music School Teacher, Music Teacher of the Year Award. I think she won it twice, but she won it once while I was her student during my 5 years as her student. And I remember in music class that all Miss Schultz ever needed to do was just show me an example of something. Like, this is what a bass clef looks like, and this is what it represents. And then I would be like, uh-huh. It was as simple as that. There was no memorization involved. There was no effort involved. There was no, I have to figure out how it relates to other things involved. It was literally like, this is the color red, and then you go, okay, I know what red looks like. What's that color? That's yellow. Okay, now I know what yellow looks like. It was that simple. So music, I wouldn't say it was always that way. When I got to college and was studying advanced theoretical ideas and working to be a better orchestrator and composer, yeah, there's a lot of work and a lot of intellect that goes into it, and a lot of planning and research. But I think it's the core ideas of making music were always just a part of me. One of the other things I've been fond of saying in the past is that when it came to learning how to play the piano, that my head already knew how to play the piano. It was my hands that didn't. And so I just had to train my hands. So music was always just there. And then in 10th grade, I discovered musical theater. And that was what really opened the door to a whole life of creativity for me.
Musical theater in 10th grade. That would be, let me see if I remember, the pajama game.
Holy moly! That's a very, very, very good memory. I was a bit rather rotund steam heat boy. Um, they did tell me to shovel more coal in the boiler, and I did. And it was, I remember that experience of being in a musical that I had never been much for a team, meaning I didn't play sports, wasn't good at team sports. I was not a coordinated kid, and I didn't like sports as a kid. And I liked intellectual exercises as a group, but I remember being the first major experience where I worked on a team, and that was both intellectual, physical, and creative, and not both, all three. And it there was a real sense. The year before in school, when I was in ninth grade, we did a year-end concert, and one of the things we did was combine some of the musical groups and did the quintet from West Side Story. And in the days before we knew what appropriation was, I was a shark,
Oh,
and
wow.
I am decidedly not Latinx, so that probably doesn't happen as much today. But I was a shark, and I remember just to continue the analogy, it felt like a fish in water. I just completely understood how to perform that material. Looking back, if I saw a video of my 15-year-old self, I was probably stealing focus the entire time. But um, but I remember those experiences in high school. Also, the power that they have, not to get political, but why not? The power that they have to be a locus for confidence building and for really, like, my experiences in choir and theater are what made me a better citizen, a better leader, a better student, a better person. Whether I made a career out of those things or not, I believe that a lot of the people who went through those programs with us gained a great amount of insight and empathy into how to look at the world through other people's eyes. That's the whole point of theater education, is to allow students to walk in other people's shoes. I mean, we are in that moment right now in our country, and it seems more important than ever. And the sad thing about coronavirus, among the many sad things, of course, the loss of life being principal among them. But another sad thing is the number of arts programs that I am hearing bit by bit that are being cut or defunded entirely across the country, and how challenging it's going to be to bring them back. So that's just another part of what I do. So maybe we'll get to that later.
Oh, I would love to. You're singing my song and speaking my language. Absolutely. This idea that
You speak Russian, so no, I'm not speaking your language.
but you could if you wanted to.
Oh,
Uh,
no, не понимаю, не понимаю.
Да-да, всё хорошо. So yeah, what's interesting about what you said, and much of it is brilliant and right on as far as I'm concerned, this idea of confidence building and how we become better people with exposure to theater and to music. I mean, I obviously agree wholeheartedly. This is the Creative Mindset podcast, for Pete's sake. But also, what what do you think happens in that collaboration? how do we grow as people? What about theater and music? I mean, I know, for example, you use your whole brain to play an instrument. You have to use the analytical part, you have to use the memory part, you have to use the conceptual part, all of that. But what about those early experiences made you feel like it does or it did make you a better person? Can you tease that out a little?
Sure. I'm not sure any of this is memory as opposed to sort of accumulated experience. Um, I suppose that's what experiences it is. So I don't need to use the word accumulated. Modify the word. There you go. Experience is it a word like unique or pregnant? You can't really modify it. I suppose you can be very pregnant, meaning like in your 9th month. But let's not get into the. This is what I do all day, by the way, when looking at language. So that's a creative insight, I suppose, if it but not much of an insight.
No,
Um,
actually, I think it is because how we use language says a lot about us. And also, you very specifically have to, in songwriting, have to use language
well, on a
in
tangent,
a
like
way.
I'm going to answer your other question about school, but tangentially, I taught at Northwestern University. I have a long-standing relationship with several universities, Northwestern among them, and I was teaching a master class with a group of students who were writing a collective musical. They had a class where they were all contributing to a theme. The theme of their musical was the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, known as Hitler's Olympics,
Mm.
and that was the Olympics where Jesse Owens won multiple times, and there was a song that a student got up and presented in this class. It was a masterclass in front of a number of people who weren't students. It was a public masterclass, and the student referred to something in their lyric called. They said something about the mall. And when we got to the end of the song, I always lead with kindness and support and praise. I think that's the right way to give criticism and feedback. Try to be constructive. If I come across every once in a while, as I do, people who's just struck out when it comes to a song that I'm trying to give some feedback to, I can still find something to focus on that they were attempting, or ask them, what were you trying to achieve here? Do you think you achieved it?
Hmm.
And when he and I were speaking, I said, you referenced something at one point about the mall. Well, can you explain to me what that was about? And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. And he said, the mall. Keep in mind, this is a 20 or 21-year-old.
Hmm.
And I said, yes, I know what I think you mean, but I just want to know for sure. Are you referring to the kind of place with a Neiman Marcus at one end and a J.C. Penney at the other, and a bunch of other famous stores and chocolate places and places to eat with a food court, and that kind of mall? And he said, yes. I said, yes. I said, well, that's an American invention. I said, and that kind of mall wasn't invented until the 1950s. And in fact, an enclosed mall wasn't invented until a little bit after that. I said, so they didn't have the mall in Germany in 1936. And it completely flummoxed him. And it brought up the whole question for me. And this is the notion of critical thinking and why we go to college, I think, which is, how do you know when you don't know?
Absolutely.
Sorry?
I said absolutely.
Yeah, what is the system you use that tells you I might not know this thing? When I used the word experience before and then modified it, and then realized, wait a minute, I listened to myself using the word, and I think of words as things, because my friend Marshall Brickman, who I co-wrote The Addams Family with, along with Rick Ellis, Marshall Brickman taught me that words are things. And what he meant by that is that they actually are objects, and that you should look at them from all sides, that they actually function in all kinds of ways, up, down, right, left. And I think it's a fascinating creative question, that idea of how do you know when you don't know? When I write lyrics, I look up words all the time that I'm certain I know what they mean, because something clicks in me, and it's a practice. It's a practice, much like meditation or medicine. It is a practice where you have to get in the habit of questioning yourself. And I think one of the keys to creativity is the willingness to question yourself, and the willingness to expose to yourself that you made a mistake, to say, oh, I got that wrong. And that getting something quote unquote wrong isn't a liability. It's not, you haven't failed. Thomas Edison, the famous quote, which I will bungle right now, but something about I didn't fail 2,000 times on my way to inventing the light bulb. It took me 2,000, tries, or whatever the quote is. I hope your listeners will look it up, and then Thomas Edison is due. And it might have been more than 2,000. I don't know how many it was, but you asked me, this was about education. This came from the notion of education. And one of the things I think I learned very strongly by doing theater, one of them is empathy, which we are sorely lacking in our world. And I do think, I sit on several boards and organizations related to making theater, and it is a very challenging question. I have white friends who've written all Black cast musicals, and those all Black cast musicals are really beautiful pieces that are intended to be performed by all Black people. And there are schools across the country, there are communities across the country where there are no Black students. And so should that school, in an educational environment, I'm talking not about professional theater, I'm talking about educational theater, should that school not perform an all Black show with all white kids? And the answer always comes back to that's the realm of the author's permission. And that's the thing that we hold on to in the theater. Now, unlike Hollywood, we don't sell our scripts, we own them. And so anybody wants to make a change, like something as substantive as the racial background of somebody, a character who's described in a certain way and as part of a certain community, they have to ask the authors through the authors' representatives if they can do that. And there's a large part of me that gets, there's something very wrong about a group of white kids pretending in a play, because we're already pretending when we do a play, and walking in the shoes of Black characters. And then there's a part of me that thinks, but wait a minute, why shouldn't they do that? I read an article yesterday, 75 things white people can do for racial equality. And one of them, it was a really compelling article, and one of those things you can do is literally if you're white, buy your nephew or your niece or your daughter or your son a book, a child, a book that features Black characters, and show them the experience of other people who don't look like you. And so it's an ongoing thing, and I think about it in relation to my shows. I've had those questions asked in relation to my shows. And, could we cast a person of a different race in this particular role? And now the question comes up, could we cast people of different genders? Often that answer just comes down to what key the song is in and voice type, because if they can sing it in the key it's written in, I'm like, great, go for it.
That's fascinating. So much. Thank you for that. I want to delve a little bit deeper into this idea of representation in the theater, representation in movies. And I don't know how often you do have a say, but when you have a say in casting, what role do you play? And obviously now we're talking about representation. How have you encouraged representation, and what will you be doing moving forward, especially in the wake of what's happening now in this country and in the world?
Yes, great set of questions. So making a musical, I don't write plays, I write musicals. And although one could argue they are musical plays, but that's a bit of a pedantic discussion that we don't need to get into today.
I don't know. We could talk about Peter and the Starcatcher.
Right, yeah, Peter and the Starcatcher sometimes functions as a musical, and as did this gorgeous play called Ink that came from London last season or 2 seasons ago, that was directed by Rupert Gould on Broadway. There was a sequence that was it was about Rupert Murdoch, and it was a musical sequence in the middle of the first act out of nowhere, and it was so exquisitely designed and done that my head exploded because I said to myself while I'm watching the play, there's a musical number, but this is a play, but it's a wonderful song. And then I gave up and I just watched it. I didn't fight with myself. So the answer to the first part about how much involvement in casting is 100%. So the thing that writers in the theater did 100 years ago was when we formed the Dramatist Guild of America, we made a decision that we were going to get paid very little to develop our shows. And we were going to get in return for that ownership and decision-making power. And we've retained that. And everyone who is a member of the Dramatist Guild of America and has a show that goes to a major theater in New York or on tour, or those are usually the two big ones, are represented by a contract that protects your right, not only to copyright, because that's one of the functions of the Guild, is to protect copyright, but protect your right as a writer to have veto power over the director, the choreographer, the designers, the cast, all of the substantive creative contributions. And the notion is you're working on a show for a long time, you're building relationships with people, and in most cases, everybody's going to have share a vision for what the show is. And so you're not going to get into giant scrapes with people over casting. And every once in a while, there is a big conversation about this person or that person. And the director is traditionally the arbiter, even though the writers still have the right. I could, at any time, I could exercise that right when I'm casting an original production of my show. Once the show is done, meaning once it goes to Broadway or off Broadway, or has its defining production, whatever that is, then when it gets done again, so the Addams Family, I'll use that as a case in point. The Addams Family is the most produced musical in North America 4 out of the last 5 years. And
wow.
When it wasn't number 1, it was number 2. And
lovely.
I'm not involved in the casting of any of those productions because those productions are licensed by the licensing company that represents the show and promotes the show across the world. It's been translated into 15 languages. It's been seen by 35 million people, etc. And I'm not involved in any of those decisions. I could be, but I'm not, because I've moved on to other projects and other things, and I trust the licensing company and give them the right to honor what it is that the creators of the show want to maintain. So the question of diversity in casting does come up a lot. When we did the Addams Family in 2010, it was a complex group of people working on that show, and it was a bit of a challenge, that show, putting it all together. And we went through a lot of conversations about the notion of them being a family, and that if they were a family, then that meant in 2010 it was really different because it changed by the time Hamilton came along, or
Sure.
Hamilton changed it, either or. Although I will say, the Wild Party in 2000, while they were not blood relatives, anybody in that play, but there are 2 brothers, but other than that, no. But it was the most multicultural of casts, and that was one of my charges to our team that worked on it, which was, it didn't matter what the ethnicity or the background of people were. We wanted to just cast the best people for the parts. And it was a wonderful notion in 2000, watching a musical that was set in 1929, where a group of people got together who might otherwise not have been allowed to. In New York City, they would have been, but it still wouldn't have been common. And there was something about that felt challenging. It felt like it was challenging some status quo that was hanging in the air. So in terms of that, we worked on the Addams Family, and we fell on the side of their blood relatives, and they were all white, and I'm not so happy about that. Like I think we thought that that's what we were meant to do. There was diversity in the ensemble of the cast, but there was not in the principals. And I think now the world is a different place, and you can cast it any way you would like, and I think it works. There are some estates that won't do that. Some estates, I know of a story where the Edward Albee estate wouldn't allow a black Martha and George in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf for professional production.
Hmm.
So again, it's not about anything but the desire of the people who made the show, and it's really their decision to make, and that's I think that's a good system.
I think I agree. I think that one of the things, like with Hollywood screenplays, it feels to me like when I know people who are screenwriters, and they basically say, and I sort of gave away my baby. That seems to be once you sell it, it's not your bailiwick anymore. And it sounds to me like in the theater for musicals, plays, um, that it's obviously different because you've got that. Now, are you the president of the Dramatist Guild? Do I remember that correctly?
Almost. I'm the president of the Dramatists Guild Foundation, which
Aha.
is a 501c3 charitable corporation that is devoted to supporting the work of America's playwrights, composers, lyricists, and librettists through emergency grant programs and educational programs.
Wow. Especially right now with where we are, I'm sure that y'all are getting a workout. That's
We are actually. I mean, I could spout the statistics. I don't know if your listeners would enjoy it, but
spout them. Absolutely.
I can give just a few, which is our emergency grant program, which is a foundational program established in 1962 by Alan J. Lerner and his colleagues who founded the Dramatist Guild Foundation. Under a normal year, in the first 3 months of a year, we would have 2 requests for emergency funds. And in this year, in the past, and that would amount to about $5,000 to $10,000 of funds that we would give out. We've given over $525,000 so far this year.
wow.
We just finished a private $500,000 raise that we're going public with shortly as a matching grant to make that $1 million, because we think that ultimately, if the need continues, and it looks like it will, we're going to give out close to $2 million this year. And one of the wonderful things about the success of DGF fundraising and our ability to reach writers in the theater, we give out grants within 96 hours of the time that they get asked. And we've never turned anybody away who is an eligible dramatist. And there are other organizations that represent writers that try to help writers, but we're the only one dedicated to the work of writers in the theater. And so if anybody's listening to this program and you are a produced playwright or a composer or lyricist or librettist and you need help, it's dgf.org.
D like dramatists, dgf.org.
Yes, correct.
Oh, perfect. I'll put that in the show notes too, so that anybody who reads them will be able to get that link. Absolutely. So let's, if you don't mind, switch the conversation a little bit back to your process.
Sure.
You've done, so much composing: Farnsworth Invention, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, obviously Addams Family, Big Fish, so many shows. How do you begin to compose? Do the lyrics come to you first, the melody? What is your process when you first sit down and you go, I'm going to write? What happens?
There's an age-old answer to that question. Is what comes first, the music or the lyrics? And the answer is the contract. And that's not really true, of course. Because I write in the theater, what I'm thinking about is story, character, action, energy, pace, exposition, conflict, and always going big, small, meaning the large part is thinking about the play and the arc of the play and the arc of the character. And the small part is each individual song or moment in a song that character might be singing. These long form art forms, plays, musicals, screenplays, novels, they take a long time and a lot of hands, because you do need somebody to look at it. No novelist works without an editor who you hear stories all the time of editors. You've written books of editors who redline the hell out of something, and most of the time it's really useful. And the same thing is true about developing musicals. So the answer, what comes first? It's all that stuff. Thinking about the tone and the character and the nature of why the character needs to sing, and what would propel the character forward to whatever it is that they're singing about or what they want. You never get it all right the first time in a draft. You're lucky if you get it half right, meaning if you keep 50% of the songs after a first draft, that's pretty good. And there's a line I know, which is musicals aren't written, they're rewritten. And that is super true. So what comes first, the music or the lyrics? It used to be the lyrics. I would set music to them, sometimes adapt the lyric as necessary because the music demanded it. And that's how I started as a composer. I started writing music with other people writing lyrics, so I didn't write the lyrics. And when I started writing lyrics, I started by writing lyrics, and then I would set it to music. Now, I would say it's equal parts. It's very much. I used to start at the beginning. I don't always now. I might start in the middle of a song. I might try to map out just a feel of the song. I might get away from the piano and think about like what's the energy of the song. What does it want to? What's the thing in my head before I start to play the piano or make noises, and to know part of the process is to really know the character. And it's hard to know the character until you write something for them. And the more you write for them, the more you know them. So I tend in my scores, I would say the stuff that remains in a show is of some old stuff, but mostly the newer stuff, because the more I get to know the characters, the better I write for them.
That's so interesting. I think it was Michelangelo who said that when he carved, he'd take a slab of marble and start picking away at it, and what was left was the only thing he didn't throw out. This is the art. The art is everything that I didn't throw out. And so it sounds to me like some of this also works in your work, that as you get to know the character, what they aren't falls away, and what they are gets to stay and be part of the song or the show, which I think is fascinating. I love that. So let me ask you, when you write, I don't, you said what comes first is the contract, and which I think is, funny. And yet when you write for yourself, when you're writing it, and I don't know how often you do, just go, I'm going to write this show for me. Because I want to talk about, uh, Tiger King the musical, a parody, in a minute. I do. I'm very excited to talk to you about that. But when you decide to write for yourself, as opposed to I have a contract and I'm contracted to do this show, what themes do you want to explore? What is most interesting to you thematically to explore in shows you're writing?
Well, I think the nadir of that for me is I Am Harvey Milk. I was asked in the fall of 2011 to contribute one song to a proposed concert that was going to happen a year and a half later. That was a shared commission among 10 gay choruses across the country, to 10 people writing a 5-minute song for a men's chorus about Harvey Milk and the experience that their own experience and what they knew about Harvey Milk. And I asked if I could write the whole thing, and they ended up saying yes, and it turned out to be this real turning point for me in my creative life, because I got to write something about my gay life and about how I felt my art and social justice finding their way into the same piece, and the piece has just been this explosion every time we do it. It's probably been presented about 40 times now, and we it's hard to describe the energy in the room. The audience goes completely nuts at the end. It's like a rock concert, um, and I in some of those major productions, I've played Harvey Milk in the premiere and in Los Angeles at Disney Hall and at Lincoln Center with Kristen Chenoweth and the Orchestra of St. Luke's, and in Denver with 750 people on stage in front of 5,000 people. It was really something. And what was wonderful about that was, I think the thing that I really do want to write about is social justice, about um, using music and lyrics to advance the cause of kindness and advance the cause of equality. And equality sounds like the wrong word to me when I say it out loud, um, but it's the word. It's that challenge. I was talking to my nephew earlier today. He was expressing on a call last night about how my nephew's 30, and he was expressing on a call about this past few days of riots and protests in America have been deeply saddening for him, and it really saddened him. And we talked this morning quite a bit about what it is that would help the sadness, what we could do, who we could reach out to, what we could be a part of. And it was a valuable conversation for me to be reminded that this is what I do. I make art. I wish there's a part of me that wishes I were, and maybe I will, like Václav Havel, go from being a playwright to being a president, although I can't be president of the US because I wasn't born here. So for all of you people who are disappointed about that, but I do wonder if politics is my next step, because I feel like art, certainly over time, art has a real impact and can make change. But I think that I think in the short term, it's up to progressive individuals to just to keep demanding that people become. It's so simple ultimately, but it's just not easy. Nothing simple is easy. Just to be kinder to each other, and that sounds crazy simple, but it's actually that's what it's about. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone, and then really carrying through with social plans and programs that see that through.
Once again, you're singing my song. Absolutely. And it's this idea that you're talking about kindness. It seems to me we go right back around to what you were talking about earlier with education and the sort of self-awareness that I think you need in order to realize that you will not have less if you are kind to someone, that you will not be lacking if
Mm.
you lift someone else up, that there's no cosmic balance scale there, that you can be perfectly content where you are and also help buoy up other people.
Yeah, rising tide floats all boats.
Absolutely, absolutely. But also, what you were talking about earlier about theater education and how it can teach us some of these ideas of kindness and empathy. I would add self-awareness. I mean, to develop, I've done some theater in my life. To develop a character, you have to really develop a sense of empathy for that character, but also you have to know yourself pretty well. And that kind of introspection, I think, might help. So let me ask you that question. When you're writing, what kind of inner life do you imagine or envision for the characters in your shows?
Uh, yeah, the process of writing is not something anybody should witness, because it is at times, in large part, it's an internal one. I'm not doing very much. It's hard to see. Writing itself is a messy process of avoidance and napping and the game show network and um, coffee and talking on the phone and the internet, and then the occasional something, and then you get lost for 5 hours in the thing, and it is, but if you don't change yourself, like routine is incredibly important. And Joyce Carol Oates, in that thing online you can subscribe to a thing called Masterclass, and
Mm-hmm.
famous people talk about their process. Joyce Carol Oates talks about how interruption is the enemy of creativity, and that you need to uh, find yourself in this space where you're not interrupted. And I'm interrupted constantly by emails and phones and people and noises and what have you, and uh, my own inability to concentrate. But my dialogue with the characters I want to write for is in lots of ways. My acting training has been a big part of that, and trying to it's a lot of I would say pretend. I suppose it is. But it's deeper than pretending. It's an inhabiting and a willingness to inhabit. What does she feel like? And for me, it's all about feelings. There's an incredible amount of thinking and intellect that goes into creating something that elicits feeling, but um, that's authentically elicits feeling. But but it's still about feeling. I don't care for the theater of ideas. I don't care for theater that is about non-emotional theater. Like, there is such a thing, and there are such plays. And I'm like, why would I go to the theater to not feel like that? The whole point for me is to go and to feel as much as I possibly can, and to so when I make things for the characters, I want to know what it is they feel and what it is they want. And invariably, I suppose, if I look back at the characters I've written for, I will find bits of myself there, and it's up to somebody else, not to me, to, if somebody else is inclined to say, oh, well, this is Andrew Lippa, this is what he does, this is his thing, and this is what he's thinking about, or this is the kind of person he was, and that's why he wrote, notice in this character and this character and this character, they all want the same thing. I don't know what that is. I think if I start doing that, I'll just fall apart. I won't write anything good. And my friend Stephen Schwartz, who wrote Wicked and Pippin and so many other wonderful songs and shows, Stephen said, at some point you will realize you've been writing the same show over and over again. And what he meant by that was that you do have your gut, your instinct, your heart, your desire to express yourself, and that you find multiple ways to do it, but that ultimately you're writing. And it doesn't mean it sounds the same. None of my shows sound the same. It doesn't mean the characters are in the same time period. It doesn't mean that the stories are similar. It means thematically and emotionally there's a lot of similarity, and that might be true about my shows, but my job isn't to analyze. My job is to make the next one.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you just said. First of all, Stephen Schwartz, he's one of my favorites. Uh, the idea of this reminds me, I don't even remember where I read this, but there was a playwright who had no, it was an author who had written something, and it was pivotal that the walls of the room were blue, and everybody was like, oh, it's because of the angst that the characters feel the wall. And oh yeah, and then the author happened to come in, maybe it was Beckett, maybe it was a Beckett play, and he came in and he's like, no, the walls are just freaking blue. I didn't have any greater idea than that. I was just,
Yeah.
the walls were blue. So when we're talking about and I, again, believe it or not, I'm only on the first page of my many page questions, so I'm gonna get going, because otherwise I will be here, and you will be here trapped all day. So when you're writing, if you're talking with a character, or if you're having characters who are singing duets and everything, there are certain melodic themes, I guess, that come through time and time again through a show. What's the reason for that? What is the sort of thing that you're trying to do for the audience to give them that little touchstone, perhaps? What's going on there when you do that?
There's a lot of new information coming at an audience with a new piece, and so you have. I strive to give them some things that would help them with their anxiety, and uh, there's a certain level of anxiety going into the theater. It's like, what's it going to be? We call that anticipation, but anticipation is another form of anxiety.
Hmm.
and 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 so the potential is that the audience is going to get lost or confused, and what you want to do is just sort of gently corral them without them knowing. And so musical motives are an exceptionally good way to bind characters to themselves, um, and and to create a sense of unity. There's I've had the question of like, why aren't musicals written by 10 different people? Like, you everybody do 2 songs. And in fact, SpongeBob SquarePants, that was recently on Broadway for a brief run, um, they um, they did that.
Mhm.
All each song was written by somebody else, and while that may be suit that particular show, I didn't happen to see that show. It may suit those characters and that material. The notion that the art form itself is the vision of a single person or a pair of people or 3 people who 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 construct. It's like architecture. You construct a foundation and a building and repeated bits so that people have something to hold on to in memory and in emotional memory. This is the thing. They don't say it out loud to themselves, but they feel it, which is this music is connected to this character. And when I
Mhm.
hear, the obvious examples are things like Peter and the Wolf, which Prokofiev guides you through the various themes and tells the story. And every time you hear Peter, you hear the strings playing, etc. And that tells you, this is the color and character of this character. And so music is a very powerful medium because it speaks to the emotions instantly, and it doesn't explain itself. It just is. And if you give it to the audience in a way that combines it with character, then the audience finds themselves caring more about a character, not only because of the things they do and say, but because of the way they sound.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, what you just said makes me think of The Addams Family. One of my favorite songs in that show is One Normal Night, and boy, did it came through her Wednesday's frustration, her ultimate frustration at being part of this family that she loves but really wants distance from. And it was an explosion. I mean, I think I saw it in previews, and I saw Krista Rodriguez in the role, and she was brilliant. And yet it was it spoke of her character so well. Conversely, in I Am Harvey Milk, it seemed like I have to say, I have so many different we could just do an entire episode on I Am Harvey Milk. I ended up writing this huge essay about the experience of seeing that show. But Friday Night in the Castro is another one of those moments where it seemed like you brought everything together to this one point of people being able to be themselves and celebrate themselves in a way that was explosive. And what was your thought around writing that song in I'm Harvey Milk? What were you trying to do? I would love to know.
Well, I'm Harvey Milk. When I started writing it, I'm a big fan of the film Milk, written by Dustin Lance Black. And in fact, Lance and I are working on a musical together, so that's kind of fun. And
Cool.
it was produced by Dan Jinks and Bruce Cohen, who also produced Big Fish, the film and the musical. And
Hmm.
so, and my ex-husband was the marketing executive on that film. So I had a lot of relationship to that film when it came out. And so when a few years later, when I'm Harvey Milk came up, I thought, well, I'd seen the movie Milk, and it was so beautiful and so beautifully told, and is a, you know, for the lack of, it's not a pejorative, it's a biopic.
Hmm.
And I didn't want to do another narrative, a traditional narrative or biography, even though it would be musical, of Harvey Milk. It just didn't seem compelling to me. And so I wrote a supposed beginning, a beginning where I supposed what he might have been like as a child, called an operatic masterpiece, and the notion of him wanting to, that he loved the opera, which was true, and that he saw his life, this was supposition, that he saw his life as grandly as he saw the characters in the operas, that life and death and you know, would be played out in 3 hours, and you would you know, you could live as grandly as the experience of being in the opera house. And his older self, played by me, met his younger self. And the second movement is called I Am the Bullet, and it is a song sung by the chorus from the point of view of the bullet that killed Harvey Milk, this notion of an inanimate object that has no, that ought to have no motivation, no thoughts, no feelings, that it does what it's told.
Hmm.
And it was a metaphor for the notion of complacency in society.
Hmm.
And you know, I am just a bullet. I do what I'm told, is what it says in the piece. In fact, just yesterday, I was talking with my mother, I think, who said that she had seen something on the news where one of the police in who shot at protesters says that we were just doing what we were told to do,
Hmm.
and it was very much a fascist kind of notion.
Sure.
And so once I did those first two pieces, I I then was free to jump around, and like the timeline was broken. I started at the beginning. I put the second song was the end. The guy's dead, and now I'm like, now what? Like, and it was a very freeing structural idea, and that I wanted to end it. I realized I wanted to end it with his famous speech that he gave on the steps of City Hall in San Francisco, the speech about coming out.
Hmm.
And so what I didn't want I Am Harvey Milk to be was a history lesson. I didn't want it to be pedantic. I didn't want it to be, oh, you straight people are not nice to us. Like, I didn't ever want that to enter into it. I wanted it to be emotionally true from the point of view of Harvey Milk and the women in his life. The woman character is this compiled sense of different women in his life. And so when I got to the fourth movement, I realized it was an interesting assignment because it was commissioned by a bunch of men's choruses, and so I had to feature the choruses. It isn't a musical in that sense. It isn't a traditional musical in that
Hmm.
sense. And so I had to feature the men's chorus, and I hadn't really featured them since I did I Am the Bullet, and then there's a piece called You Are Here that Harvey sings with the chorus, and then I was like, oh, I got to feature the chorus. Like, I got to go back, and I want to show what was 1978 like. The whole thing takes place over the year that he served, the 11 months he served as on the city board of supervisors in
Hmm.
San Francisco. And so I decided I was going to write a disco song. It was the height of the disco era, and I thought, well, a disco song for a men's chorus, well, that's going to be fun. And that's really all I did. I wrote a disco song for a men's chorus,
And it
and
was
the roof
fabulous.
rips off. Thanks.
I no, I you know, in my review of your show, I said I have no idea how anyone in the audience can be expected to stay seated while that song is being performed. I just, you know, I was very lucky we were sitting in the back row, and then I was able to get up and dance, and my husband was looking at me askance, but I did it anyway because I was no,
Delightful.
yeah, there was no way I was going to just stay seated for that. That was such brilliance. So I want to step a little bit before I let you go, uh, back into just you. What When you listen to music, what do you listen to?
I tend to I like to listen to all kinds of music, but the music that speaks at the core level of me is what anybody would call classical music. It doesn't mean specifically 19th century European classical music, but even I very much like contemporary, what they call contemporary classical music. I've been obsessed in the past few months with Bryce Dessner. I don't know if you know his work.
Mm-mm.
And this double piano concerto that he wrote for the Lebec sisters. And I and also film composers who venture out a little bit. James Horner, before he died, to put out a record that was uh, written for cello and piano and orchestra. I mean, cello and violin and orchestra. It was absolutely beautiful piece. And I find orchestral music to be really exciting and soothing, and also just gets me in touch with deep, deep feeling. Um, I like contemporary music, and I like a lot of contemporary music. I tend to get bored because a lot of contemporary music, once you hear the verse and the chorus, there's a lot of repetition, and I get like it's gonna repeat. And I'm like a magician in that way. I talk about this in making shows. When magicians go to see other magicians and they see them do the tricks, they tend to know what all the tricks are.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, well, I want to see something I've never seen. And that's how I am at the theater. And that's how I am with music in general, or songs in general. I'd like to hear something I've never heard. I want to know, I want to hear it from a different way of looking at it. So I often poke around online, looking for new things, um, and I'm often led back to classical music.
I'm that way with jazz. Classical music I love, but I have very, I'm sort of the romantics, Baroque, great, and then I skip right over and head over to jazz. So it's funny because I said let's ask about you, and then I have something that I wanted to bring up, and I wanted to get your thought on what that line meant to you when you wrote it, because I Am Hannah Hutchinson. That I saw the premiere at Strathmore Hall in Bethesda, Maryland, near Washington D.C. I was lucky enough to be in the audience. Thank you for that. And there was a line in the show that she said, and I immediately started weeping. And it's when uh, she's singing to her accuser, and who's accusing her of stepping beyond her bounds, for those of you listening, as a woman, by reading from and even teaching from the Bible. And she says, "Is that what you fear? A woman, an insignificant woman, being significant?" And that's when the waterworks started for me. What did you mean by that line? What was that about for you?
If I may, it's one woman, one insignificant woman being significant. And um, that sequence in Anne Hutchinson is what we affectionately affectionately called the mad scene.
Hmm.
Many operas have what's known as some famous operas like now I'm forgetting the title of it, the Donizetti opera, but I forget what it's called. And we have a famous mad scene, and the mad scenes are usually relegated to the soprano. And and I wanted to write this fantasy moment where she got the chance to say things that she might not have been able to actually say.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, this notion, of people being treated, anybody who isn't a straight white guy in our country, women, people of color. I mean, it's basically everybody else, who isn't a straight white man. The notion of power resting with anybody else, any kind of power. I mean, look, I wrote Harvey Milk, where power rested with a gay man, a certain kind of power, a power in a legislative body. And with Anne Hutchinson, a certain kind of power, much of it derived from her extreme faith-based way of looking at the world, but that was how most people looked at the world in those days. And this idea that a woman would stand up and say, you have called me this thing. You have said I am insignificant. You have said I am small. You have acted this way. Our president acts this way and treats women with disdain and treats them as if they are less than. And when they stand up and say, when they do something that in any way defies him or makes him feel small, which doesn't take much, then he lashes out. And this is what women have had to endure for centuries. This is what is going on among our Black population right now. This is what goes on with every person of color in our country. This is what goes on with people with disabilities. This is what goes on with people who are members of the LGBTQ community. The whole, if I can almost swore, it's a podcast. So
You're allowed to swear. All I have to do is put the little E for explicit.
Yeah,
Go for it.
the whole
Speak your mind.
fucking point is that people don't like to lose power. And the white people have been in power for a long time, are losing it. And I am among them, but I'm not, because I'm Jewish, I'm gay. I've always identified as the other. And sooner or later, the other is no longer the other. We're the everybody else. And Anne Hutchinson in that moment sang very powerfully, one woman, one insignificant woman being, isn't this what you fear? That's what she sings. Isn't this what you fear? One woman, one insignificant woman being significant. And one of my favorite things about what follows that is there are 4 bars. It's in 3. And there's this sort of, that's the 1 bar. And the 4 bars that follow it, I remember writing it. You can't really write this on the piano, but I remember telling the orchestrator, it is as if the entire the entirety of hell is opened up with its arms open for Governor John Winthrop, waiting for him to step in. And so she sings being significant, and on the significant, the strings go, ugh! They make this great noisy crashing downward thing, and then the orchestra loses its shit for 4 bars, and it just goes like all the drums banging away, and people, it's the noisiest cacophony, and then it gets quiet again, and then she sings, she pulls herself together. But for those 4 bars, it was this notion of, I will conjure the forces of everything, darkness, light, anything that will take to shut you up. And that's that musical thing I was talking about, where there's no language in those 4 bars, but it's that noise that says, this is the noise that comes from a woman who has had to hold her tongue, from a woman who's been told she is insignificant, actually claiming her power. And this is what the world would sound like. And because you have suppressed it, you, whoever you are, have suppressed it for so long, that the forces of chaos are going to be unleashed. And it's so biblical, and it's happening right now. The forces of chaos are being unleashed, and they're being unleashed in the service of something beautiful. And this is that notion of life and death, of growth. Bone growth happens during your sleep. Children go do bone growth. 90% of their bone growth happens in sleep. Why? Bone growth is painful. Why is having a baby, why will women tell you it's the most painful experience? Why? Pain and growth are partners. They must, you cannot have growth without pain. So this is what we're going through societally, and this is what I think about when I write musicals.
Oh, nothing much. Wow. Okay. Wow. So yes, that moment in the show, and I was writing from memory, so I apologize. I thought it was a woman, but it's one woman, and I'm glad to know that because I use that as a kind of a rallying cry whenever I'm in a situation to uh, teach students. When I go into schools and I do my communication workshops, I bring up this show and I bring up that line. So now I'm going to say it correctly because it's so important, especially for girls, and especially for girls who who are at that age where they're trying to figure out who they are and what kind of strength they want to show and they want to possess. It's a great moment to tell them about because it is claiming your power like very little else out there. So I thank you for writing that because it has helped me educate lots of children when I go into schools and I do my programs. It's all it's in almost every single one. So thank you for that.
Of course.
So and again, I'm gonna shift gears because I know you have a life to get back to. I want to talk about I want to talk about Tiger King the musical, a parody. What is it? Tell me what brought it about and what is it?
So, everybody has their coronavirus tale. Many of them are similar. Mine was really, I've been very fortunate and no, thank God, been very healthy, as has my family. And that doesn't mean that I was frightened, and I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear in March and early April. And we figured out that the world can continue now in a way, and we've been very, very blessed through this. So I know there are many who haven't been, and that's part of the reason I work so hard for the Dramatist Guild Foundation. Um, but during that period, I really did not know how to spend my days. I did not. It was cold. I wasn't going to go outside. There was nowhere else to go. And I didn't want to watch TV all day long. But we did watch all 7 episodes of Tiger King in 2 marathon sessions. And um, what I found so intriguing about it, and what I realized later, was not the murder, mayhem, and madness part, although it is all incredibly cuckoo. And what I realized was that what Tiger King is about a group of people. In the case of Tiger King, Joe Exotic, Carol Baskin, and Doc Antle, who are um, wildly imperfect, if not altogether corrupt leaders who demand fealty from the people who work for them. In the case of Doc Antle, the women around him, I mean, just like they're like sex slaves. And Carol Baskin is this controlling, God knows, what she's done or will admit to. And Joe Exotic, of course, is a truly like mentally ill guy who didn't give a shit about those animals. And they demand absolute fealty from people who are dependent on them for their livelihoods, but will talk shit about them behind their back. And in that way, it resembles our current government. And to me, I suddenly realized we are the tigers. And we are going through this. And this is why so many people watch Tiger King, not because it's fun to watch crazy people, but because we see ourselves in those people and animals who are being abused. And I recognized also that it's a comedy. And so, or it ought to be, the parody ought to be a comedy. And so I wrote a song called Little Pieces about my supposition that Carol Baskin had cut up her husband and fed him to the tigers. And I shared it with Kristen Chenoweth, who the results are on YouTube. So you can go look up Little Pieces, Kristen Chenoweth, and we got a lot of coverage, and it was wonderful. And then she connected me to Frankie James Grande, who has a huge following online, and who I had met once but didn't know. And we had a wonderful chat, and I decided I was going to write a song for the 19-year-old Travis, Joe Exotic's second husband, and I wrote a song called Husband Number Two that Frankie made a wonderfully funny video. And then I talked to Richard Kind, a wonderful comic actor from many films and television shows. And Richard wants to do one as well.
I love
And
it.
sorry, I missed you.
Oh, I was just, I love it. I love Richard Kind. I think that's I think that's great. So
It's hilarious. And anyway, it just became something that I could do to stave off the fear and to give people a giggle, because there was so much. I stopped watching the news at a certain point because it was so upsetting,
mhm.
and it was so frightening that this this virus was coming to get you, and it was like it was hard to know what to do, and I didn't want to return to writing a musical. Nobody knows when we're going to be able to get back together to develop actual shows, and it just felt I just couldn't get my head around it. So I took a break and I started doing a bunch of other stuff. So I wrote some of those Tiger King songs, and I this Sunday the United Jewish Appeal at 1:00 is doing their Israel Day parade. They usually do a parade that 1 million people come to in New York, and they're doing it online. And I wrote a big song that caps off that parade, and produced that song. And I've written a few other singles. I wrote a piece for the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus called "What Will We Hear?" And I presented it to them last night on Zoom. It was really fun with 180 guys, and I showed them the song, and they sight read it as they listened to the recording I made.
Wow.
And so I've been doing a lot of single songs about various things, and eventually I will return to making longer stories.
Well, I look forward to that for sure. Wow. Tons of stuff, tons of stuff. I have to come back to the parody. What is in the future for Tiger King the musical, a parody? Is there a future for it somewhere, or is it going to be a number of one-off songs?
Uh, I don't know yet. I had a certain amount of interest from some producers who have asked me about wanting to develop it as a musical. Part of me thinks that it has a very short shelf life,
Mm.
and part of me thinks that that shelf life might be a year. Who knows if we'll still be talking about it next year? But my agents and I are in the process of talking to a couple animation companies about doing a very rudimentary animation. So animation takes a long time, but we could do a half hour or hour long special, animated special for television called Tiger King the musical, a parody. And it would when it's animated, it would also take the sting away, I think, of it being it makes it even funnier. I think there's an opportunity, much like South Park the movie. I think there's an opportunity there. So if we can encourage somebody we don't know yet to get the heat for this thing, then we might be able to put it together in the next 6 months. So we'll see.
Oh, that's awesome. I hope that, I mean, little pieces. I've certainly spread it to every single person I know, but it's gruesome and it's hilarious. And of course it's you're writing and Kristen Chenoweth singing it. So of course it's going to be fabulous. I want to again shift gears a little bit if it's okay.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of your other interests. I know you're an interfaith minister, and I was wondering what drew you to that. What made you decide this was something that you wanted to pursue?
I grew up in conservative Judaism. I was very involved in synagogue life and extracurricular Jewish youth group life when I was in schools. I later in my 30s ended up, long story that I won't get into, but I was in Vancouver and I ended up for 9 seasons, I was the high holiday cantor of a synagogue for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, a wonderful synagogue in a suburb of Vancouver called Richmond. And my father died in 2007, and I found that my Jewish background, and I had been feeling this for a long time, my Jewish teachings and background hadn't deepened, or they hadn't led me to something substantive that allowed me to feel connected to others and connected to God in the way that I thought I could be. And I went through a pretty transformative year in 2011, had a significant emotional falling apart. I went to rehab for 6.5 weeks. I got a lot of care and a lot of help and had a lot of rebuilding of my own heart and soul that I had to do. And when I got back into life later that year, that was also, by the way, the year where only a few months later when I Am Harvey Milk emerged. But which is, very, I take that as a spiritual sign as well. But I met somebody through my work in healing my brain. I met somebody who had been ordained at One Spirit Interfaith Seminary. And I said, what's an interfaith seminary? And she said, well, it's the notion that all paths to God are beautiful paths, and that many people walk in many ways, and that why couldn't we walk hand in hand? And that the world is more and more people joining, making families with two faiths. My sister's married to a Catholic. My fiance grew up Christian, Lutheran faith mostly, Lutheran denomination, and that there need to be people who can help navigate some of the life cycle events for these kinds of unions and families. And like I said, there are more and more people looking for this kind of leadership. And I looked on their website and I read pages and pages of stuff for days, and I decided this was for me. And so I applied and they accepted me, and I went through a 2-year training program, and I've performed since then a number of weddings and other life cycle events. I was the officiant at my nephew and niece's wedding. He was raised as a Jew with a Jewish mother and a Catholic father, and she was raised, I can't remember the Christian denomination, but she is very devoutly related to her Christianity. And I was able, with their help, really, to provide an environment where they both felt their families could come together and their faiths could come together. And it was just one of the most thrilling things for all of us as a family, that we could bring those two kids together, and that I got to be the officiant. So anyway, it's been a real blessing, and it has helped guide my path, both in my creative life and in my personal life, and I suppose also in my life of trying to be of service in my nonprofit life as well.
I'm going to take a minute and honor that. That was lovely. Thank you. We're obviously living in a really challenging time, and I'd like to get your opinion on what role spirituality plays sort of societally, and also where do you think hope can come from during this really tough time?
Well, everything. I believe in interfaith life because dogmatic thinking has never ever led to. It's led to some really nice buildings, but it doesn't lead to peace. And I remember when New Orleans was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, and the first things people were saying after they were dealing with taking care of the health and well-being of the people there was, we're going to rebuild. And I'm like, what hubris pill did you swallow where you built a city that's below sea level and you think you're going to rebuild that city and you think you're going to beat the odds? And that kind of human hubris is the only word I can think of. We build cities in places that are going to fall into the sea, and we build religions where we say you must do this. This is the only way because God told us this is the only way. And sure, we get it. We're friends with our neighbors, but this is the only way. And if you don't do this, then you're really fucked. I just can't live like that, and I can't tell that to other people. So I think we're not gonna fix it in my lifetime, but I do think we might be at this critical juncture where if enough of us come together, we might be able to come up with a new way, or we might all be destroyed. Like part of it, part of my, I don't, this is the opposite of hope perhaps, because I don't hope this happens, but uh, I am open to this possibility because I do think if I were the earth, what would I do? And um, when I had 7.5 billion inhabitants of me, most of whom aren't nice to me. They just aren't good neighbors. And if I were the earth and had the power to do it, and by the way, the earth does have the power to do it, and we're in the middle of that power right now, I would say, you know what, I should get rid of some of these things. Like some of these things, this is bad. And so this is what the earth does. The earth has cataclysms like viral infections and storms and all these things to restore balance, because human beings are just not good at restoring balance. And I wish we were better. And if I were running for public office, someone will find this podcast and use it against me. And they will say he's a nihilist, although they won't use that word because nobody knows what that word means. But they will say that I am, anti people, or that I'm depressive. And no, the truth is, we get told. This is recently. Somebody said, if white people ask you why didn't we protest civilly, our answer is we did, and you didn't listen. And then there was a picture of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee at a football game.
Mm-hmm.
And when the earth comes to us and we have that dialogue with the earth, it says, why are you doing this? Why can't you be more gentle with us? And the earth will say, I was, and you didn't listen. And that's super simple, guys. That is super simple. And Al Gore's been talking about this for 25 years. And if we choose not to listen to the earth for a whole host of other reasons that a lot of people think are important, the economy, and therefore feeding people, and all of the challenges involved in running a global order. But if we don't listen, if I were the earth, I would reach a point of saying, you know what, I just can't do this anymore. You guys got to go. So spirituality is the opportunity to say, what is it that, what does the earth want of us? What do other people want of us? What does the spirit of the world, whatever spirit you believe in, whatever inhabits the world as larger than you. 12-Step Life talks about the idea of just something that is bigger than you, the force, music, art, a tree, the sky, the animal kingdom, whatever it is. You can pray to anybody in any way you want, as long as it guides you to goodness. Because goodness is irrefutable. There is no definition of goodness that tells you it's not good. There is no definition of kindness that tells you something other than kindness. And kindness and goodness, surely goodness and mercy will follow him all of his days. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord. Yeah, the whole idea of dwelling in the house of the Lord forever, according to the Christians, is kindness and mercy. You don't get to the house of the Lord without it. And I'm not suggesting I believe in conditional spirituality, but I do believe that we're being told all the time, every which way, how to behave and what to do and what to participate in and what not to participate in. And I am as guilty as many people who think they are enlightened, like I sometimes do, by buying toilet paper. Don't need it, shouldn't use it. But have I been able to phase it out? I have not. And this is our task. This is our task. And I am doing the best I can with all of my weaknesses. And I know that each day, if I remind myself to do a little bit better, maybe I will. And interfaith life allows me to connect to all of the people who, before I joined fully interfaith life and thinking and ministry, before I did that, I thought, oh, well, they're different. They do this differently. And now I recognize, no, they don't. No, they don't. There may be a few ideas that have been espoused that are different. There may be a few rules, or maybe a few rituals, but that is no reason to keep me from my neighbors in India or China or South America or anywhere in the world. We should be able to come together and break bread and dance and laugh and cry and love our children and take care of the earth.
Absolutely. Right there. I think you've done it. I'll vote for you, Andrew. Uh, no, because I've said this so many times. The Earth will be fine for the next 4 and some odd billion years. The Earth will be fine until the sun does what it does when it comes to the end of its life. It's not the Earth so much. It's everything else and everyone else on it. Because the Earth is going to be okay. It will go through ice ages. It will go through nuclear winter. It will go through whatever, and it will rebuild on a geologic time scale. So 60 million years from now, there might be more life. Who knows? So what we are doing here in this moment, I think, is standing on the precipice of something that if we take one step in one direction, we're going to go towards healing and towards kindness and goodness, like you said. And if we take a step in the other direction, then we're going to careen into an entirely different direction, which might be a lot more challenging for many of us. So I honestly spend a lot of my time meditating and praying on that we will, as a world, take the step towards goodness and kindness, because I think that's the path to ultimately healing and to making progress in a responsible, substantive way that takes into account all of the beings who are suffering. So I completely agree with you, and am so grateful that you said that. And I have just one more question before I let you go.
Sure.
And you might have said it already because of everything you just said. Uh, if you had a plane that was going to skywrite something for all the world to see, what would you say?
Oh, be nice. Yeah,
Ta-da!
my late father, when we were walking through a park in Boston, a whole group of us in my family, my oldest nephew was very little, and some man came up and started harassing us, and was really, really hostile and harassing us, and it was scary. And my sister grabbed my nephew and pulled him away, and the man was really getting in our faces. And my father, who was not an aggressive man, you may remember him,
Oh, yes, I do.
not an aggressive or hostile man in any way, went up to that man and stuck his finger at his chest and yelled really loudly, "Be nice." And the man was so shocked by this command, um, and that his whole posture dropped, all the tension stopped. He looked at my father, turned around, and walked away. And I thought, that is the power. Be nice.
And it is so powerful. Somebody asked me, do you know who, I'm sure you do, Jennifer Ashley Tepper?
Oh yeah, I love Jen.
Yeah, so she's going to be on the show the week before you are. I
Nice.
just interviewed her last week or the week before, and she's the first person of all the interviews I've ever done who said, "So Isolde, what would you say?" And my answer was, "Be kind." So
Oh,
so
there you go.
that would be that, or leave it better than you found it. That's my other go-to when I have to think about what something like that would be. But what came out was be kind. So you and I had very similar answers to that. Andrew, is there anything else that you would like to say to whoever's listening? Anything, any last bits of advice or anything that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, other than thank you. This has been lovely. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And if you're listening, this has been Andrew Lippa, who has been gracious enough to give us some wisdom and all sorts of really amazing insight into the life of a composer. And this is Andrew. This is such an honor for me. I mean, the last time you and I spoke this substantively, really, we were probably still in high school. So, where we used to at one point be inseparable. And I think your junior, my sophomore year, something like that. We spent all of our time together when we weren't in class. So now getting a chance to get reacquainted was just lovely. So I thank you for that, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you again.
This is the Creative Mindset Podcast, and I am Isolde Trachtenberg. If you have enjoyed what you have been listening to, which I'm sure you have, because this is, of course, Andrew Lippa you've just been hearing from, please rate and review the show. Let me know what you're thinking. Comment. Tell me if there are other people I need to have on this show to really get into the nitty and the gritty of what it means to nurture and nourish creativity and art and music and that creative mindset. I'd love to hear from you about it. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I send you all of my love. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2021. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, remember to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind.